Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Kame House lobby with the 2MK team. Today, we are all gathered together in various ways, so you're going to be seeing a lot more people from my account. But not everyone is in the same location at the moment, and therefore, we still have enough players to have a serious lounge, or a relatively serious lounge anyway. As for our discussions, they're likely to be close to the same as usual. Minor notes, specifics about things people are working on and styles, and things you can use to apply to your own and think about flow. Having done quite a bit of practice in other games recently, but of the type that would carry over to Dragon Ball FighterZ, there's not as much to talk about in terms of stuff people have been doing in this game quite yet. But understanding movement across fighting games as a whole can often make a big difference, even if it's only to your confidence. Sometimes just knowing that, okay, I took all that damage not because I suck, but because I made a decision in a mix-up, and that decision was won my opponent red or had some solution to at my range. All those little pieces come in, and the recognition part is what we're almost always aiming at, so you can actually get better when you are taking damage. Most of us do not manage to fight for super long periods, taking no damage, and therefore being calm enough and mentally quick enough to recognize when you've done something that doesn't fit correctly into your own plan is probably one of the most important things you could do. Today you're probably going to see a lot more talk in chat, similar to our guild here, and as a result I may not be speaking about specific things if the conversation in chat is already going on about it. Or if chat information is important to convey, since some of our videos do go up onto YouTube where you would no longer have the stream chat, if we do not have an overlay for that in that form, it might still get a mention, so that people watching on YouTube later can understand what the context was. You can of course join us as always. This is a neither stays on US East Coast 2 lobby. We're not too concerned with the lag unless it's horrendous, so if you're anywhere in that general area and you want to at least come in and test it out, there should be no problems. Note that neither stays on in this game means that you will always get a break between matches unless there are only 3 people left in the lounge. And when there are precisely 4, it usually means you get the same opponent repeatedly, so you might need to rotate yourself around if you want to change opponent. Someone has to give up some space. But once you've gotten to 5, it basically means that the better players, or at least the winning players, play a little more often, but not constantly. You will get some rotation of opponents, but you're more likely to end up fighting whoever is winning the most. So if you intend to join, please bear in mind that this is neither our usual loser stays on, nor a more standard winner stays on. And prepare yourself for having some free time, even if you win your matches. But for now, enjoy some Dragon Ball FighterZ.
相手をしてやるまでもなかったか、雑魚が。
This should be a great fight! Are you ready? Fight it out! Wonderful!
この攻撃はやるな、そこか。次にやるな、そこか。僕も加勢します。この攻撃から生きた。この攻撃からそれでもガイドやるな、生きた。逃げろー、待てやってみせ生きた。僕も加勢します。なめんじゃねえ。相手だ。こんなもんかよ。絶対に遅いぞ。なんだどうだ。終わんじゃねえぞ。なめんじゃねえぞ。なめんじゃねえ。そうだ。ここだ。なぜだ。嘘を食わせ。加勢します。邪魔だ、どけ。こんなもんかよ。なめんじゃねえ。絶対に俺の成果を見せてやる。なんだどうだ。無駄だ。そこだ。よっ。そこだ。なめるなよ。調子に乗るな。無駄だ。ここを見ている。そこだ。そこだ。点数をつけるとして点。逃がすか。なめるなよ。たれな。こんなものか。今のうちに下がるんだ。点数をどうだ。笑わせんな。目玉だ。なんだここだ。笑わせんな。そこだ。マイ全力でいくぞ。点数許さんぞ。よっ。笑わせんな。うい。よし。コテ。兄ちゃん。こいつはハンデだ。調子に乗るな。目玉だ。今度は俺が相手です。そこだ。これでもやれよ。
今回は一発食らわせましたよ父さん。
Trumps! Win!
頼ってばかりはいられない。これからも俺のこの手で勝つんだ。
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess! It's all or nothing! Fight!
頼みます。これから見せるのが本当の力だ。虫けらが見てた。私にバリーやる。行くぞ。相手だ。どうだ。俺が殺してやろう。なんの邪魔だ。殺してやる。見えた。参った。これから見せるのが本当の力だ。行くぞ。待て。そこでこれ以上好きにさせんぞ。お前はもう終わりだ。完全に消え去りです。あっちゃった。今楽にしてやる。この攻撃だ。生きた。 誤算だったな。
Trunks! Win!
もっと強くならなければまだ見ぬ敵を倒すために。
Time to begin the match! Are you ready? Go!
死に損ないぜ。行くぞ。ハエが。
食事の時
行くぞ。
食事の時
終わりか。邪魔だ。いいだろう。
油断してたぞ。まあまあだな。遅いぜ。なめんじゃねえ。かかってこい。
仕方だ。
負けないわよ。出てきやがれ。よっ。そこで。まあまあだな。出てこい。そこで。こっち。うわ。いいんじゃねえぞ。仕方ないわね。これで。そこで。スタッフがお味はどうかしら。終わりじゃない。とっておき。
目玉だ。
あっちゃった。
さて、楽しませてもらおうか。くらえ。ビッグバンそこだ。点数をつけるとすれば30点ってところだ。ここを見ている。よし、こちらプレゼントだ。行くぞ。ビッグバン目玉だ。さら ったれなそうだ来たまれビッグバンが無駄なこと点数をつけるとすれば30点目玉だここを見ているファイナルスプラッシュ貴様などスーパーサイヤ人ブルーとなった俺の敵ではない。これがスーパーサイヤ人ブルーだ。よーく覚えておくんだな。
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Are you ready? Let's go!
俺が直々に相手をしてやる。届き者が調子に乗る。届き者が嘘だ。誤算だったな。これで終わった。ありがとうみんな。
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! It's all or nothing! Let's go!
ビッグバンが
食事の時間だ。
そこだ。もう終わりか。ビッグバンが邪魔をするのはこんなものか。よろしくもう終わりか。目覚ましだ。
食事の時間。
こんなものか。
どうした。油断してたぜ。
邪魔をするな。どこへ行くんだ。
遅いぜ。まあまあだな。
こいつはどう点数をつけるとすれば。無駄だ。目玉だ。今楽にしてやる。どこへ行くんだ。
楽しめそうね。負けないわよ。ちびっと負けないわよ。終わりよ。そこでまだよ。終わりよ。見せてあげる。
無駄だ。
俺がやってやら。どうした。
さてこの私にバリー
冗談じゃない。
こいつはファンでは。そこだ。見えて。
おいで。
ファイナルスプラッシュ。これで終わりだ。この俺が本気を出すまでもない。
怪我をしても知らないわよ。
ここを見ている。
よっちょいてねそこで受け取りなさい。これで最後のあなたも食べてしまうわよ。どうよ私の力。同じバイオ人造人間でも性能が違うのよ。
It's time to face your opponent! It's all or nothing! Let's go!
また行くぞこっちだ。しっこれでどうだ。どうだ。ませんこれでも食らえ。大丈夫か。ダイナマイトキック。ミラクルスーパームーブ。甘い甘い。ヤッホー。俺に指図するな。調子に乗るな。受けるがいい。我が刃。調子に乗るな。逃がさん。逃がさん。そうみたいな。大丈夫ですか。かんな。よっ。不足。よっ。かんのほど知らずめ。うい。調子に乗るな。よっ。うい。逃がさん。オラが相手だ。おりゃお願いします。トラックさん。おりゃよっこっちだ。だぞおりゃ行くぞ。おりゃまだまだおりゃこっちだ。えいしっどうした。ダイナマイトキック。ミラクルスーパーパワー。よっ。どうした。うい行くぞ。まだまだよっ。なんて力だ。ミラクルスギア。貴様の相手はこの僕だ。なんてカンナどうした。終わりだ。 許さんぞ。届きます。いや、破れるとは。よっしゃー。ダイナマイトキー。よっ。ウィー。ダイナマイトキー。行くぞ。まだまだ。もうゴテンクス遊んでばっかりいるからだぞ。クリリンさん、引退しても力を衰えていないな。僕も見習わなくちゃ。
It's time to face your opponent! Are you ready? Go! 死ね！クズめ！
食事の時
なん
こんなもんか。叫んじゃねえぞ。
これがプレゼントだ。調子に乗るな。そこだ。そこだ。もう終わりか。死ね。もうつけんとすれば
仕方ないよね。回せるかしら。
ビッグバン目玉だ。
まだよ。
こんなものか。
まだよ。いや、もうした絶対に許さない。油断してたぜ。よくもコケにしてくれたな。なめんじゃねえ。こんなもんとは絶対に許され。あっちよっなめんじゃねえ。遅いぞ。まあまあだな。俺がやってやら。
ここ握ってやろう。選手交代だ。今楽にしてやる。宇宙の塵に 無駄だ。そこを握ってやる。こんなものか。ここを見ている。
こっち。
ファイナルスター。この俺様だ。
冗談じゃない。
無駄だ。そんなバカな。
俺がやってやら。なめんじゃねえ。そんなもんかよ。
さて、さあ協力してもらおう。
なめんじゃねえぞ。
地球ごと消えてダメだね。
クソだね。
では諸君、ごきげんよう。どうしたのだ、さっきまでの勢いが。笑えよ。
It's time to face your opponent!
Ready? Go! 悟空さんか。これは気を抜けないな。
かんな。うい。逃がさず。神の力を見るがいい。調子に乗るな。受けるがいい。我が刃。邪魔だな。へい。愚かな小僧。愚かなそういう
今度は俺が相手だ。
なんのしまった。なんのどうだ。ここだ。お前をギュッとミラクルスーパードッパー。中距離はないぞ。行くぞ。修行の成果を見せてやる。なんのなんのなんのまだまだなんの 参った
今度は俺が相手です。この攻撃からやってくれる。
ナイスティアンドよし、ほらもっと修行してもっと強くなっかんな。
We are still seeing more or less the same flow. If you're monitoring the stream chat, you should have a decent idea of what we're looking at, though it's not that much thus far. You may see new team members soon or a switch in the actual person playing from this account. But once again, remember that you can join us in this lobby looking for Rillian the Red Hit outside of Kame House. This is the US East Coast 2 neither stays on lobby with the passcode. The passcode is normally visible somewhere, but in this case, 2717 will get you into this particular lounge if you wish it.
まあまあだな。よくもコケにしてくれたな。何なんだ。死ね。油断してたぜ。なめんじゃねえ。この程度だ。カメハメハ。叫んじゃねえぞ。
こいつは犯人だ。点数をつけるとすれば、ここを見ている。
そこでふっそこで
この俺様が
回せるかしら。
点数をつけるとすれば、点数をつけるとすれば、そんなバカな。
俺が撃ってやる。よくもコケにしてくれたな。そこ油断してたぜ。俺の本気に見せてやる。全力出しちゃう。叫んじゃねえぞ。クソぞ誰。あなたも食べてしまうわよ。どうよ私の力。同じバイオ人造人間でも性能が違うのよ。
All or nothing. Let's go. Counter.
この攻撃だ。 やるな。行くぞ。はっ、どうしようか。なんと無様な姿か。逃がさん。神の力を見るがいい。間に合って愚かな無様だな。受けるがいい。どうした。ちょっとしろ。調子に乗るな。終わりだ。愚かな。素晴らしい力。行くぞ。まだまだ。俺が破れるとは。オラが相手だ。許さんぞ。行くぞ。これから見せるのが本当の力だ。これで終わった。ありがとうみんな。
Brace yourself for the coming battle! Ready? Fight it out! 行くぞ！落ちろ！
は助けによし邪魔だこの私にバリエー俺に指図すんな油断してたぜ油断してたぜなめんじゃねえなんだとなめんじゃねえないかよなめんじゃねえバカなまあまあバカな油断してたぜファイナルステージ怪我しても知らないわよそこで受けてみなさいこれで最後よそこでとっておきマリ終わりよ助けてちょうだいそこでやっは全力出しちゃうとどめそこでそこが邪魔だどけお願い何そこでせいどうしたよっ許さないわ俺様一人いれば十分だビッグバンビッグバン覚悟はいいやろうよそこでよ受けてみなさいこれで最後よさて勝った自分へのご褒美タイムねいただきます
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
Goku さん全力でいきますこれならどうだクリリンさんどうしようか
Time for our first rotation and shift. So we are expecting some changes in the numbers or actual levels of play, I'll put it to the members starting at this point of the stream as a general thing.
俺は無天老師様の弟子なんだ。この程度のやつに負けてたまるか。
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
Buzz, お前から血祭りにあげてやる。
It's all or nothing! Fight it out!
食事の時間？
邪魔だ。じゃあ少しだけ。もう終わりか。来たんぞ。死ね。もう終わりか。すぐに終わらせてやる。さてこの程度この私にバリアを張らせるとは。カメハメハ。
なんですって？
今楽にしてやる。調子に乗り上がってファイナル。 かんぞクズなんでやる今楽にしてやるすぐに終わらせてやるそう人の死なせてもらおうかさてカメハメさて無駄だこいつはどう無駄だベジータ様を失望させるなよ無駄ださて無駄だ暇つぶしにはなったな不意打ちでも狙っていたのか残念だったな
A fierce showdown is about to begin!
悟空さんかこれは気を抜けないな
私を待たせるな。逃がさず神の力を見るがいい。かんな。神の力を見せてやる。まだまだ。終わりだ。届き者が今のうちに下がるんだ。修行の成果を見せてやる。俺が直々に相手をしてやる。届き者が 俺が直々に相手をしてやろう。愚かな。嘘だ。悟空の顔で悪さこう見えていくつも死闘を繰り広げてきたんだ。舐めてもらっちゃ困るぜ。
Get ready for battle! Get ready! Go!
感情
Counter!
死に邪魔をするな感情楽しいぞ楽しめそう
食事の時間。
行くぞクズめもう少しだ行くぞクズ力がすぐに終わらせてやるさて受けてみろさてとどうしたカメハメ半壊この程度か受けてみこの私にバリアを様を失望させるなよもう終わりか行くぞほらそれそら覚悟しろすぐに終わらせてやるカメハメハ突入地球ごと消えてなすぐに終わらせてやる砕け切れ無駄ださて無駄だ
怪我しても知らないのよ。
そろそろ殺してしまう
そこで受けてみなさい。これで最後よ。
Destructive finish!
こ
挑んできたあなたが悪いのよ。
Android 21 win!
獲物を捕らえたらすぐにお菓子に変える。これが美味しいスイーツ作りのコツよ。
It's time to face your opponent! It's all or nothing! Go!
届き者が愚かすぐに終わらせてやる。この攻撃だ。何？スピードには自信があるんだ。それくだらん。俺に指図するな。カンナ指先指先甘い。貴様が相手。じゃあ少し逃がさないぞ。どうだ。俺様だ。どうだ。そらそら。なんの。どうだ。いっぱい飛ばすよ。どうだ。そう楽しませてもらおう。この程度だ。無駄だ。なんの。こっちだ。許さん。しまった。まだまだ。カメハメハ。しまっ。二度と吸収させてたまるか。これでも少しは腕を上げたんだからさ。
begin the match. Ready? Let's go.
もう終わりか。もう終わりか。楽しめそうだ。無駄だ。楽しめそうだ。強靭なネクタイ。愚かしまった。神の力を見るがいい。タクがなんかどうかしら。終わりじゃない。つらないと。そこで全力出しちゃうの。これで最後よ。逃がさしまった。神の力を見るがいい。終わりだ。スピードには自信があるんだ。愚かな俺が破れるとは。ご天主様の登場だ。そろそろ許さん。ちっ、ここは譲ってやろう。虫けらだ。この私にバリアを張らせる。そろそろ無駄だ。地球ごと消えてダメだ。では諸君、ごきげんよう。どうしたのだ、さっきまでの勢いは。笑えよ。
The battle's about to start. Good luck! Ready? Let's go! じゃあ
れでどうだ。
僕も加勢します。
頼みます。
すぐに終わらせてやる。この私にバリアを与える
全力でいくぞ。
ここは譲ってやる。
まずいな。
すぐに終わらせてやる。こいつはどうだ。
どうした。
足にならん。このベジータ様を失望させるなよ。
どうした。クリーンさん。
さてと、どうした。何許しませんぞ。
おけばか野郎。
さてどうした。
大丈夫ですか。
俺がお荷物になるとは。
本気でいくぞ。
さて、
見えた。いっぱい飛ばすぞ。
なんだと。何か。
貴様が相手です。
どうだ。残像だ。見えた。なんだ。いっぱい飛ばすぞ。
どうだ。どうだ。飛べ。
逃がさないぞ。 そか生きてるな。
Win!
こう見えていくつも死闘を繰り広げてきたんだ。舐めてもらっちゃ困るぜ。
That was a lot of mix-ups, in ways that most people would not actually recognize as mix-ups. But as Just Fine and OmniRapid are generally in our other games, the grappler mix-up players, they are able to play at a depth of that most of the rest of us can't keep up with that easily. It's generally a mental state in which you're very aware that there's no specific reason why your opponent is likely or less likely to do any particular thing other than their win, meaning that even things that seem completely unnatural or irrelevant to a matchup become tools based on what generally is referred to in the FGC as the hard read. But the hard read is never quite that hard. There is usually some understanding of hitboxes or character interactions that makes it possible for these things to happen. And Dragon Ball FighterZ is absolutely chock full of those interactions. Whether it be super dashing to high profile something, or using a preemptive whip punish style heavy or crouch heavy to catch a button that gets stuck out in a delay, there's always going to be something you can find to do that only beats your opponent's option if they take a particular option. This comes up a lot in games where you have strong gatlings and general ways of making sure that you're safe after certain types of attack. You spend a lot of time learning all of the nuanced interactions instead of specifically learning how to stay safe, as your opponent will generally know you intend to stay safe and use something beyond that. Meaning that it's not really a good indicator of what we were talking about on our last stream, the more specific and obvious block, deflect, or use meter form of the matchup. So, given that, in this sort of match, you're much more likely to see that specific thing. Even then, though, Broly does tend to mess with it. But if you've been following us for a while, you have a fairly good idea of which of our players played more on our older streams, for example, and which players are catching up, and therefore will do much more in the blocking and deflecting department.
ルアップのつもりが少しやりすぎてしまったかな。もう少し楽しませてくれると思ったが見込み違いだったようだな。
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Get ready!
すみません。
神の力を見るがいい。逃さないぞ。間に合って。どうした？逃がさん。許さんぞ。俺が破れるとは。オラが相手だ。こっちだ。許さんぞ。すみません。少しやりすぎてしまったみたいです。
It's time to face your opponent. Get ready. Let's go.
For a defensive player, there is one additional use of meter to get them out of negative situations like this. However, this is a relatively costly meter use if you don't have a lot of confidence in your ability to do certain things. Your characters might, however, benefit from it, or in certain matchups you may benefit from it, so it's something you're likely to see a little bit more used by our main defensive player. Justline can end up in situations where there is no specific way out of the opponent's mix-ups or pressure without causing at least some risk of being chased down. And there are quite a few opponents who have moves where this becomes a problem purely because their moves do a lot of chase or tracking. If you find yourself in this situation where you're facing an opponent who does a lot of chase, and you don't know what else to do, you can use your assist button to do the guard cancel, i.e. the change based on using 1 meter similar to a V reversal if you are familiar with it from Street Fighter, or guard thrust slash repel from Eunice, those sorts of things. Dead angle attack, guilty gear, whichever game you otherwise have come from, you might have a different term for it, and if you don't have a different term for it, well then you're probably fine, as this will be the first game where it comes up. While blocking, you can press forward and this button, or depending on your inputs, sometimes down and your assist button, to perform a quick Z change with some invincibility on it. But one of the larger problems with this is that it is quite blockable, as you've just seen. It only really works on functions and attacks where you expect the opponent to try to chase you and you couldn't have dashed out or otherwise resolved it. Therefore, it becomes something you learn to use at higher levels because your opponent has improved their tracking or mix-ups enough that you have a problem getting out. This move actually cannot be done in the air, but there is some good news for people who are worried because, oh well, that's no use. I'm usually worried about this sort of stuff when I'm down to 1 character. This actually does work when you're down to 1 character, but what it does is a little different. It treats it as a vanish, but a vanish that moves a little bit forward and is a little slower, meaning that it's not even as good as an actual vanish, or rather, depending on the block stun of the move, it technically is almost exactly equivalent to a vanish. That said, this still works in the same specific situation we're speaking of that makes it good. If your opponent has to chase you, if you gave them the impression or have now gone to a situation where your best bets are to jump, i.e. use our usual up back that we mentioned, or back dash, or even back dash deflect options to that sorts of things, and you somehow think, oh, this is not going to work out for me. Somehow, my opponent is going to chase this down with some relatively committed move or a cancel, but a move that might not be unsafe enough or that might let them continue pressure if they call an assist, those sorts of things. You still have the option. You can do this, and because your opponent will have committed to the move, you will end up behind them and while they go flying and leave you without specific danger for yourself. Of course, this is even more useful in the corner, but less likely to come up in the specific situation where you are at the corner already. It is, however, a great way to prevent yourself from getting cornered at the last moment, realizing that you are close to the corner, you think that you will still get caught if you backdash and then probably get corner comboed, which is worse. Generally, at that point, at worst, it will put you back mid-screen or toward the middle of the screen, and the type of character we're talking about that causes this sort of problem in mix-ups is not easily the sort of character that puts you back into the corner quickly. if they have to chase you across the whole screen to do it, meaning they would have to make an instant reaction of their own to vanish themselves, to at least get to the other side, and so on. The layers of offense involved here tend to shift more as you understand your opponent better, and it really isn't something we've talked about before because it isn't actually one of the main things you should be doing. You need to convince your opponent first that they have something else to be concerned about before this comes up. While you cannot actually perform this move in the air, there is something almost equally effective. Once blocking in the air, most players end up in something akin to a frame trap because of the speed of their air normals, or the way that the targeting is done. If you have no air normal that will hit the direction that your opponent wants, but they are currently pressuring you, basically we will consider them to have advantaged directionality in the air. They get to keep on occasionally tapping buttons without you being able to hit any since they have such control. You can, in this situation, do the same thing in the air because it will result in a Z change in the gaps between this. This is normally a terrible idea on the ground because the Z change itself would often cause the character to either get hit or you really just wouldn't be able to do it with the same timing, as grounded rock strings tend to be a little more solid. There's not so much tracking or spatial advantage involved. If your opponent got into a space that was too close to you with a certain type of move, you would be able to hit a fast move and not have to worry about that fast move whiffing in the same way at least. You're both on the ground, everything is more or less normal. In the air, you have to worry about, will this move hit? And if it doesn't hit, does my opponent get to keep their combo going for some reason? The Z change tends to deal with this, especially against characters who don't have strong air supers. They have less reactions, and it is one of the hardest things to react to with Vanish, period. Meaning that it becomes an actual Z change, making it technically better as it costs no meter. But coming with a small risk of the opponent's flow leading to you being in trouble in some way. High-level players will of course have methods of dealing with this that stop you due to the assist, and that would be the downside. They don't have to spend any meter or commit to much other than using an assist to do this either. And if they've been getting a good enough setup on your aerial position the entire time, it's much less likely that they won't have an assist to use for the purpose. This is all based, however, on the idea that somehow this situation is so disadvantaged to you that you would want to do this rather than try to air escape in some way. The main thing to consider is whether or not your opponent has a lateral chasing move that was likely to hit you for hitting buttons, or for backdashing instead. Many characters do a lot better with actual moves that get them out of the air situation. And they're often the same characters that don't get out of the ground situation well. This is another level of tactics for your character. Is my character one who should try to up back if I feel the situation is hopeless so I can get this form of the change? Or is my character one who needs to stay on the ground so I can get the guaranteed guard cancel style V change against an opponent who uses a particular type of pressure? The final point to consider about it is the fact that the Z change is in fact technically a way through regular key blasts, meaning you can also calculate this entirely based on whether or not your opponent's assists are the type you can go through with key blasts, but are otherwise just minor keep you quiet style blasts. There are not a lot of characters like this in the game, but there are a few of them, and generally, because of the timing of their assists, they are very powerful at playing this form of the game. You can absolutely worry about being placed in things with Android 21, for example, as her assist does work like this, and she is a character who often easily supports the sort of team like Cell who has a big push on it. This is not to say you should specifically aim to guard cancel out of that pressure, but at the end of the day, if you have few other options and don't really know how to take on the situation, and a lot of meter, at best, your opponent will be unable to do too much to you, especially if they are using advancing attacks like Cell or Broly. And at worst, obviously you get hit, but at least you had an option rather than letting them set up their full combo or whatever else was likely to happen. This also helps quite heavily on characters who call assists that move forward in specific ways in order to help perform the pressure, such as Bardock and to some extent Videl. This, like everything else, can be beaten because despite the fact that the guard changing character is actually fully invulnerable for just a moment, with most of the full invulnerability going to the character that is disappearing and leaving. You still can get red, you can still get hit by Crouch Heavy and sent into a different type of full combo. But once again, if you really thought your opponent was going to read even the guard cancel, you had some other concerns. This is particularly useful for characters who don't have good wake-up level 1 supers, but who somehow could benefit quite a bit from keeping the opponent off them, or even just taking a smaller risk to push them off. Sometimes going for the level 3 and getting that baited is simply more expensive in terms of meter and you don't want to risk it. So an advanced tactic you can add to your skill set specifically once you've mastered the other forms of defense and found that there are still situations where you just feel unable to do anything because you're too likely to be chased and comboed in the chase.
頼みます。やってみせる。見切った。
You can see in this match some very specific uses of Vegeta's kick. As a method of air recover and catching opponents by surprise when they try to play the air-to-air game. Characters with strong options like that in the air are generally better at defense simply because they don't have to land in predictable ways. Even if they whiff entirely with the move because the opponent expected that they were going to, it doesn't usually mean that there's too big a punish coming. It's more of a scramble, and with the correct assists, the scramble turns in their favor quite quickly. We did get to see the no other players left version of it at the end, and it did work in exactly the situation expected, so I expect to see a lot more such conversions, as Just Fight and OmniRabbit understand each other's offensive style reasonably well, enough that I'd expect that sort of thing to work about 50% of the time.
The battle's about to start. Good luck! Are you ready? Fight!
This is another matchup where that sort of interaction can be useful. But as somebody who has not specifically practiced that response to things in other games as yet, preferring to mainly work on actually getting out of things in terms of spacing and footsies, as his characters often have this advantage. He not only does not need to do it as much, when it does need to be done, it's sometimes easier just to let it be, because the opponent that he's fighting knows that he technically has the option. Or he's facing someone who will not take advantage of the fact that it might not happen the way he wants it. The result is a style that is built around understanding it a lot more, but this game is probably the first game where that's not really an option. Character designs are much more strongly tilted toward staying very close and keeping it up, or not doing so, meaning that particularly against the wolf, this may eventually become a requirement simply because both Broly and 21 can stay closer a lot more easily without having to worry too much about the opponent jumping out due to the long reach of their moves. Cell, at least when he does it, has a chance to be seriously high profile because most of his moves with the type don't hit fast enough to catch a back jumper or simply go under them. But Broly tends to hit the entire space in front of him very hard.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess! Get ready! Fight it out!
や行くぞやった終わらせてやる俺様だ調子に乗り上がってファイナルオッケー行くぞクリリンさんやーラチだこっちが待って言い切ったそこかはいそこかこの俺が落ちた受けてみろどうしてこれでも食らえそこか
大丈夫ですか？
無駄だ
許さんぞ
コテ兄ちゃん
貴様が相
行くぞどうだ焦っこー行くぞ
While Dragon Ball Fighters is technically not really a momentum-heavy game, understanding when you have the capacity to pay off in terms of getting an opponent close to death or dead does create more of a snowball style effect against certain players depending on how much resources you have to use to do it. That is mostly a question of, do you have enough meter to beat whoever is left? And is your opponent heavily disadvantaged by their team being less people altogether? At the beginning of this fight, we saw the advantage of Omni Rabbit's team in that putting them low on health, even with level 3 supers, is only specifically effective if Krillin is already out of the picture and you have strong control of either his flow or neutral itself. Otherwise, obviously, the Senzu Bean will come into play. Even if it is just to restore a smaller amount of health, it often changes the momentum part of the game from this character now has to risk switching out or falling to I have to do one more mix-up. And one more mix-up is one more opportunity for you to get hurt.
Time to begin the match! Get ready!
ぞ。楽しめ。こいつはどう俺が殺してやろう。もう終わりか。もう終わりか。
楽しめそうね。あなたも食べてしまうわよ。さて、勝った自分へのご褒美タイムね。いただきます。
The battle's about to start. Good luck!
Get ready! Fight!
登場ね。そこね。どうした？
さてと、さあこの私にバリーを
そこね。ありがとうございます。白状はマジンどうかチェック。まだ本格チェック。
遊びは終わりだ。
今度は俺が相手だ。
もう終わりか。山を行くぞ。
怪我しても知らないのよ。 無駄に
これ以上好きにさせんぞ。お前はもう終わりだ。完全に切り込んでしまえ。すぐに終わらせてやる。さて、そろそろ殺してしまう。さて、無駄だ。さて、地球ごと消えてなくなれ。さてと、
修行の成果を見せてやる。本気でいくぞ。どうだ。逃がさないぞ。どうだ。二度と吸収させてたまるか。へへ、ちょっとは様になったかな。
Brace yourself for the coming battle! Get ready! Go!
すぐにこの程度山田セルこれでどうだ。そらそらどうだ。これまたなんだと。
We have about half an hour left in this stream. Weren't necessarily planning to actually go this long, but through some shifts to training, we now have everyone rotated around for a particular goal. Which means you get to see Suntear and Cosmic Wolf face off, working on their usual things, but also the standard Omni-Rabbit versus the Wolf matchup, with a little bit more of the specifics involved. Both of these tend to be relatively slow matches, as the newer DBFZ players build up their flow, and those who are more used to it have complementary, let's say, fighting styles, meaning that you get to see a lot more interactions that don't necessarily result in damage. Even if they're not always full-on defense, there's a bit more of different things going on, and the Wolf's team is not exactly the greatest at forcing the situation, i.e. preventing Omni-Rabbit from utilizing Krillin's senzu beats. meaning that often that match is quite skewed in that the wolf actually has to do between 30 and 50% more damage total to win them. This match has a lot more reliance on air flows and directions, and the fact that sometimes one can use Vanish and Super Dash to get out of situations that would not be possible in the neutral of other fighting moves. Because this game tends to move so quickly in total, targeting the spot where your opponent is right now works about as well as you'd expect if you're a fan of the show. Despite this, targeting where you expect your opponent to be isn't really the full answer either. The game allows for a lot of flows where you are carrying a sequence, and that sequence changes your attack vectors midway. Meaning that because there are so many wide sweeping moves, even considering some normals, and moves that are able to function in two spaces if you use certain methods to stay in them or to shift them, it's more possible to follow paths like that. For example, Gohan, adult Gohan, his crouch heavy, is cancelable into things, but also has a really great bit of upward tracking so that he doesn't have to rely on stand heavy or different grounded buttons that the opponent can jump out of. If he can hit with the absolute max range of the crouch heavy, he still has ways of making the situation favorable to him, meaning that looking for moves that let you cover more space and then ways to make those moves more functional can be a really useful way of thinking about how to get your offense going. Your opponent generally will want to keep you in those situations, and because of the main ways this game uses defense, specifically opponents moving away or deflecting, even moves that would otherwise seem unsafe if blocked, in a situation where your opponent does not want to just keep blocking, become good options simply because your opponent will let you deflect them, and it really doesn't matter what move you were hitting when you were deflected. In almost every case, you were sent to the same distance across the screen, and the same overall outcome happens, meaning there's little risk in hitting them if you feel as if your opponent's basic options are defense and they're not going to keep blocking. They're either going to backdash, jump back, or deflect, so feel free to use those moves. In the case where they do happen to block, if you have meter, quite a few characters can deal with the situation by spending some, or perfect spacing allows them to backdash out or cause other weird interactions to happen. It becomes a defensive mix-up on your side, but usually one that your opponent is not waiting or ready for. Since the characters in this game tend to have a bit less normals than Street Fighter style games or even King of Fighters, and despite their general flow, they don't tend to have enough command normals to make them similar to Guilty Gear. It's usually easier to find these moves or to just be clear that your opponent can have escapes and your character doesn't have any chases at all other than specials. That does mean, however, that the moves you do have that are like this are even more precious. For Footsie's characters, this is usually their stand medium, especially if it can hit at max range without putting them too close. And for defensive and zoning characters, for various reasons, it seems to almost always be their crouch heavy. Offense characters often have a lot more options in this regard because they need to be able to keep the opponent pinned down and catch them and chase them for trying to get out of situations. But a lot of them also are able to just use Super Dash in that situation, purely because the opponent is more likely to try to get out of things with either meter or waiting for a spacing problem to happen. In either case, you should watch out for it unless you're playing Cell, who functionally has nearly none of these, I guess as his balance system.
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Are you ready? Fight!
The fact that it's so hard to hit an opponent who is in motion, especially with slower moves, makes zoning a much more predictive thing in this game than most, particularly shifted because of the fact that the beams are instant. And then they simply continue until they're done, giving you basically no way to reposition things or set up traps for most characters. And on top of that, the interesting characters who don't do this, who functionally have the setups, generally can only use Ki Blast, meaning that their setups and similar blasts don't actually work as zoning. Specifically Beerus, and to some extent, Base Goku. This leads to the interesting situation of knowing that you have a problem in terms of where you want to attack your opponent from, and having functionally very little way to attack them. The solution is to once again treat it as Dragon Ball if you're a fan of the show. Don't ever do it. While this is a weird concept for a lot of fighting games where understanding where exactly to put the opponent is paramount, and therefore understanding where you can attack at is super important, this game is quite heavy on movement and defense in most situations, meaning that you don't really have to worry about it. Eventually, because of the speed of moves and the ability to use your Vanish to end neutral at basically any time, it means that even a momentary flinch from the opponent causes them to get hit, even if not for much damage, and it was slightly increased of all that on top of that. Super dashes help out the process, particularly against characters that don't have strong options in other places, meaning that interestingly, a lot of the time, a zoner will want to use an assist as their zoning tool, use some method of getting in to convince the opponent to try to move out of position or to stay in position so that they can supposedly counter it. Finding the right moment to super dash in, therefore, even if you have absolutely no intent of actually landing any damage, is helpful because it can cause certain opponents to think, oh, I should be doing defensive things, giving you more of a chance to zone them properly. You can even use meter and metered attacks for this on certain characters, with a huge bonus if those attacks are actually in themselves zoning attacks. Overall though, the important thing is to learn how to view the match so that you can look back at situations, and even if you feel as if you made a horrible mistake or couldn't keep up, that you can at least dissect why that happened and make any plans for how to work on it later.
Time to begin the match!
Due to the relatively patient and drawn-out nature of these matches, this is almost certainly, if not the second last match of the night, definitely the third last. Meaning we've reached a point of the stream where you're unlikely to get any games if you did choose to join it.
Ready? Fight it out!
ぱい飛ばすぞ。助けまずここだ。泣けなめ泣けないわよ。どうだ。そこね。よっ終わりよ。そこね。ここだ。させないわよ。逃がさないぞ。どうだ。そうカメハメハ。ここだ。終わりよ。見せてあげる。いいだろう。楽にしてやる。参った。
これから見せるのが本当の力だ。
あの人
そこか。
怪我しても知らないわよ。
黙れバリ
こんなことが食欲が出てきちゃう。こっちよ。まだよ。
これ以上好きにさせんぞ。お前はもう終わりだ。完全に消えてしまえ。スーパーサイヤ人の壁、その先を俺はさらに超えてしまった。これで終わった。ありがとうみんな。
A little faster than expected thanks to that light show from Trunks. Meaning, of course, that we move into our second last match.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! Are you ready? Fight it out!
これなら私を任せる。うさくぞ。しろ。
この程度か。ささだぞ。ここは握ってやる。
俺に指図するな。受けるがいい。笑い刃。こちら。皆さん。受けるがいい。笑い刃。皆さん。終わりだ。調子に乗るな。なんだ。終わりだ。私を待たせるな。働き者が私を待たせるな。孫悟空逃がさん。どうだ働き者がうるさく
It's no secret that Dragon Ball FighterZ gameplay was based at least partially on the frenetic style of Marvel vs. Capcom games, but even then, those games actually had a relatively higher amount of diversity in a particular way, whereas this game is more of a distillation of those concepts. Specifically, the part of it is closer to pressure and bullet hell. Meaning that if you were coming to this game from Marvel, depending on your characters played in Marvel, you might find that this is nothing like that. Even if you found characters who supposedly had the same style, your opponent's capacity and main options for stopping you might have had to be completely different. That said, most character choices are still made with the same concepts in mind. Leading to Cosmic Wolf playing characters like Cell and Ghost Black, much in the style of playing Amaterasu teams in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, for example. Understanding which aspects of a fighting game correlate to other things you understand, and which ones don't, is a really important and relatively quick shortcut to actually being effective at a new one. Which is the challenge that these two have tried to face once again today. As noted before, everyone actually only plays this game once a week now. There is, however, the possibility of using Dragon Ball FighterZ bots in order to level up at timings for expectations for tournaments, or once you've built enough basic skills that you actually believe you could convert some of the situations you're seeing into damage. But we tend to treat our Dragon Ball FighterZ bots relatively reactively compared to other games, because the base principles of this game don't change too much with new characters. It's simply a matter of, in the same Marvel style, learning to watch particular different zones and understand very specific different pressure. While there are such things as entirely different playstyles, these are not usually enough to completely change a matchup, because you can always just build up some level of meter, some level of sparking, or land a single hit in certain situations, and the tactics are then pushed right back to where you were before. This actually is something you saw in Marvel, but not in the same way because of the various ways that assists were actually used and how often they could be called. This game, however, is definitely 3x3 assist heavy, meaning that in the end, even if you manage to lock down your opponent's character, you still have two other entirely different characters to deal with, and all sorts of situations relative to both assists and meter, with a lot of screen crossing and neutral ending moves, meaning that even zoners don't necessarily play zoning for long. This is directly our last match of the night, even if it is short. You can find the DBFZ bots mentioned at our website 2-mk.org/DBFZ-bots. Other bots for other games, such as Unist and Street Fighter V, can be found under those names in terms of acronyms. SFV, Unist spelled without any E's. Generally, we use whatever the FGC at large considers to be the acronym for the game, because that's obviously what you use to make it easier to find. The Guilty Gear content is exercises and should be looked for separately if you're interested in it. And we still have to decide exactly what we're going to do for the DOA bots that we are possibly having soonish. Tomorrow, however, it's back into our obsession with Monster Hunter. With the release of Monster Hunter World Iceborne, if you are a fan of that, you already might know this from our streams or Twitter content that we very much are. And most likely are going to be playing Iceborne for as long as possible, especially in the afternoons when everyone is available and work is not a thing for all of us at that timing, but the majority of people on the team will be playing Monster Hunter, and therefore there will be no stream. Our upcoming content relative to bots and streams, however, should be going back to normal despite Ice Lord, or so we hope, in the coming week and beyond, meaning that next week Monday will be another mishmashing Battle Lounge for Street Fighter V, and quite likely, at this point, another Tuesday train. As for whether or not we get Wednesday content, that one's a little iffy, as we tend to, as mentioned, take at least one day off to work on bots, work on concepts, and other poking things. But we are expecting to have another Kame House next week, Thursday. Next Friday content is basically undecided, as we don't tend to decide a full week in advance, but the general trend should be heading back towards content specifically for DOA and Guilty Gear. New bots to help you understand new things. We hope that despite the initial silence in this stream, that what was mentioned was in some way helpful, as always. For those of you who are also fans of Monster Hunter, good luck in the Hoarfrost Reach. And we're literally just waiting to see when this dance of trying to open cell up from nearly full screen actually ends. Oh, that was not the expected outcome of that. That said, you can keep up with all our news on our Twitter 2_MK_FGC. Normally we will tweet at least around 7 or a bit before Eastern time to let you know if we are streaming or not. But this has been really in 14 2MK. Good luck with your training, and good night everyone.